good. How are you?
Good, good. Do we have our little girl presenting with you today?
No, my little girl's not there. They've gone to pick up cat biscuits, or else my cats are gonna go
Oh,
crazy.
that is fair enough. That is fair enough. How are you going with lockdown and everything?
Yeah, it's not too bad. Works okay so far. So we'll see how it all. We'll find out on Tuesday. See where we land.
Yeah,
So
fingers crossed it's a positive place.
yes, we'll see how it all kind of goes. All right, let me see if I can share my screen and get
Perfect.
it. All right. Hmm. Okay.
We have a vortex of, there we go.
I think Max it plays up, so it just comes up with the screen. But let me know when we're ready. Okay, so
Yeah, perfect.
I've
We'll
got
start in 2 minutes' time, but welcome to stream 2 for everybody. Um, hope you guys are all having a good day so far, regardless of where you might be. We've got some awesome presentations in this particular stream. And of course, always excited for Javid's work. He is third year PhD candidate?
I think I've
Or
just crossed over. So here we go.
at AUT there in New Zealand, and personally a very good friend of mine. We connected at SMANS 2017, I think it might have been, when I was an honours student and Javid was a master's student, I think, at that time. So, and
Yep.
now we catch up via Snapchat on what seems to be a daily basis at the moment. So, a great example of how coming along to these events can create lifelong friends all over the world. So, that is enough about me and our relationship there, but it's cool to see what's possible, and I know having the support of other peers in this space is invaluable. Um, so very exciting. Yay for Samant's friends, exactly, Sterling. Sterling is another one. Awesome. Well, we are right on time. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Javid to present his PhD work so far. Take it away.
Thank you, Charles. Kia ora koutou, ko Javid Ali tōku ingoa. Hello, everyone. My name is Javid Ali, and I'm a fourth year student, jeepers, PhD student from Auckland University of Technology here in Auckland, New Zealand. I come from my house while we are in alert level 4 lockdown in New Zealand. So, yeah, you might see some cats running behind me. Do write down some kind words for that. Today I'll be presenting an overview of my PhD so far to you, along with some high-level findings. But before I begin, I want to firstly acknowledge my two supervisors, Dr. Michael Naylor and Professor Leslie Firkins, who have been with me through this journey, and they've been super insightful, supportive, and really patient with me, considering I have a million things going on in my life at any point in time. So thank you, big thank you to them, and I also like to acknowledge my industry partner, New Zealand Rugby, who have been extremely supportive of this project, and it could not go without them. So, push the wrong button, here we go. So my PhD is an exploratory study of the experiences of early career rugby referees in New Zealand, and a key focus is on a number of aspects which contribute to the experience of referees. Ultimately, these findings will help refereeing organisations to implement strategies which will help recruitment and retention. As we know, there's a shortage of officials everywhere. So like I said, here we go. My slides played up a little bit, but there's a shortage of referees at the grassroots level, and we know this not only through research but also through the media. And with the amount of studies that have been done in the refereeing and match official space, it is a growing body of research, but it has been mainly focused on North America, UK, with a few in Australia. So there are limited studies in New Zealand, and especially of rugby referees. So, I mean, that gives us a great starting point in terms of why we would explore rugby referees and match officials. The premise of this study focuses on the experiences of referees, and the literature suggests that motivations, abuse, organizational influences, perceived organizational support, organizational commitment, and role commitment all have a role to play in the experience of referees. And the organizational influences that I talk of are perceptions of administrators, education, referee coaching, rewards, recognition, and sense of community. What we also know is that the attrition amongst first-year sports officials range from 33 to 60%. So that is quite worrying. And then furthermore, other studies have said that officials within the first 5 years are more likely to quit in contrast to those who've been officiating for 5 years or more. This is also supported anecdotally by our industry partner, who in one of our initial meetings mentioned to me that those that are earlier in their career are likely to quit. And it's quite true, considering for myself, I've been a referee for 14 years and I haven't, whilst I've thought of quitting, I've never actually got around to doing it. So here we go. Just a really quick kind of overview in terms of what my research design looks like. So to understand the experiences, we've implemented a 3-phase mixed methods approach. In phase 1, I was able to access data collected by New Zealand Rugby, which included registration data from 2010 to 2019, and also surveys sent out to rugby referees from 2013 to 2017, and also in 2019. Note that in New Zealand Rugby did not send a survey out to their referees in 2018. Of all the surveys, of the 6 surveys, there was 2,670 responses, which were a mixture of qualitative and quantitative results. So I went through and analysed all of those. Phase 2 was our primary data collection. In fact, was the first part of primary data collection, and this comprised of a questionnaire which explored 3 models. I'm going to quickly talk to you about what the models look like, what the models were. So the first model explored if perceived organizational support and role commitment and organizational commitment influence the relationship between motivations and intention to continue. The second model explored the relationship between organizational influences, which I spoke about on the last slide, a couple of slides ago, and intention to continue. And the third model explored if sense of community influence a relationship between abuse and intention to continue. 320 usable responses were analysed in phase 2. To gain a deeper understanding, obviously we undertook some interviews. I have conducted 18 interviews with referees aged from 14 to 60 years old. So we've got quite a broad range of different experiences there. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the phase 1 results. Registration data provided some insightful information about rugby referees over the 10-year period. This included age, gender, ethnicity, where they were from, and whether they were returning or new to refereeing. Over the 10-year period, referee numbers were relatively stable, and they peaked in 2013 with 2,091. Over the 10 years, on average, 79% of referees had returned to refereeing. Interestingly, when we dug deeper and explored the return rates by age, under 18s had the lowest return rate by about 50%. Had the lowest return rate of 50%, 25% lower than the next age group, which was quite worrying. The survey data also, so then exploring the survey data, 82% of all the referees indicated they intend to continue. So if you can kind of look at the comparison, they're quite similar. And then when exploring early career referees, 84% indicated that they'd return the following season. And then when we further dug deeper into the subgroups of early career referees, 3 to 5 year referees had the lowest intention to continue, result with 81%, while first years were highest with 89%. Whilst the differences are quite small, it's quite interesting to see that first year referees are quite interested in continuing. So then we looked at the two parts of the data in terms of the experienced referees and early career referees. So we conducted some t-tests to see if there were any meaningful and statistically significant differences present for items measuring satisfaction, refereeing environment, and training and support. Whilst the four results on screen are statistically significant, the differences between the groups were quite small, with differences up to 0.21 for mean scores. These scores were out of 5 as well, just for your information. Whoops. Here we go. As part of this, as I said, there was also qualitative information in the surveys. So there were 5 key themes that came out that were identified, and they were motivation, the rugby environment, the influence of the organisation, training and development, and enjoyment. Whilst I could sit here and do a whole presentation on all 5 of those things, I thought I'd pick enjoyment to say what are the things that referees actually enjoy about their job. And as you can see, there are 3 kind of key areas. Literature indicates that enjoyment has a positive relationship with intention to continue, and these are some quotes from ECRs who indicated they'd continue relating to the sub-themes. The 3 sub-themes are opportunities given, appreciation by players, coaches, and others, and then also the social connection amongst referees. I think the coolest one, is that last one in terms of, well, I think they're all pretty cool, but the last one and the appreciation one, talking about the influences of other people, and it's not only the refereeing association that has a role to play. Phase 2 results. So there were 3 key insights from the phase 2 results that we found, and we did of the survey that we disseminated at the end of 2020. The data suggests that ECRs and experienced referees are not a homogenous group, and so therefore they perceive some experience factors differently. So we suggested that it is important that referee associations ensure that they are aware of these differences and adapt their engagement with both groups accordingly. Consistent with the New Zealand Rugby surveys and the registration data, 80% of referees indicated they would continue in 2021, and the survey disseminated by us. This is a positive finding. However, as everyone knows, it is important that officiating organisations do not sit on their laurels and ensure that they continue to support ECRs and experienced referees in their unique ways. And then literature and personal experience suggests that experienced referees are generally less supported and left to their own devices. So our findings suggest that experienced referees also require ongoing organisational support, and this influences the intention to continue, which is consistent with the literature. As I mentioned earlier, exploring the experience of rugby referees, 3 models were tested. This was done through a binary logistic regression, and for the binary logistic regression, we collapsed the 7-point intention to continue scale into a binary yes/no item, where responses were either a 6, which were either a 6 or 7, were recoded into yes, and scores less than 6 were recoded into no. The analyses highlighted interesting findings. However, I've identified 3 to share today. In contrast to the literature, abuse was found not to have a relationship with intention to continue, whereby a lot of other studies have said otherwise. And this opens up the idea of how officials perceive abuse and whether rugby referees in this case are conditioned to ignore the abuse they receive. Whilst there are limited studies exploring role commitment and intention to continue for officials, in our study it was found that early career referees, there was a relationship for early career referees only, and it is, and not so much for experienced referees. And then, as alluded to earlier, many experienced referees are left to their own devices, not supported or recognised due to their long-standing experience. Interestingly, recognition does have a relationship with intention to continue for experienced referees only. So this is consistent with another study of referees in Australia, of rugby referees in Australia, which highlights a lack of recognition as related to withdrawal. We're nearly there, team, I promise. As I mentioned earlier, I've completed 18 interviews for phase 3 of my studies. Of those, 18, 9 were conducted in person, and I was lucky that I could travel to Wellington and Tauranga outside of Auckland to conduct 7 of the 9 in-person interviews. 8 interviews were conducted via Zoom, and I used the Zoom AI transcription service for 7 of them, and then 1 interview was conducted over the phone. I'm now at the stage where I'm tidying up the Zoom transcripts and outsourcing the transcription of the remaining interviews. So fun times ahead for me. And just the road ahead, with the end being near, I hope. I've set myself some lofty goals for the road ahead. As you can see, I have a busy 12 months ahead of me. I guess there's a disclaimer in here, considering we've just gone into lockdown, and Leslie made a comment saying that the situation of alert level 4 might throw all of this into this, will throw a spanner into the works. But here we go. We have to set ourselves some goals and see where we'll end up. So kia ora rawa atu. Thank you for listening. And that is me. That's my Twitter if you want to see the rubbish that I spout about sport.
Awesome work. A great presentation. Thanks for sharing. And we can really see clear findings and clear developments, both practically and academically too. Any questions for Javid, please pop them in the session chat here. But yeah, I think I echo Sterling's comments. I think abuse not correlating with intent is going to be a fascinating piece. Is that something you're going to publish?
Yeah, so there's an opportunity to do almost 3 papers out of that phase 2. So definitely that abuse and not intending to continue. It's a whole different spanner in the works in terms of what literature's told us.
Yeah. Is it something you've experienced? How does that influence your own personal perception?
Yeah, it's interesting. Mike and I had some real good conversations around this piece, and I think as a referee, we're all taught to kind of expect it and just act like it's water off a duck's back. And so when you're expecting it, you don't take it to heart. Maybe whether that's different in other parts of the world is an interesting part, and probably keen to kind of explore that a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking the fact that you're sort of trained almost to just be expect abuse. That shouldn't be how the world works, but clearly it is. But interesting that it doesn't have an effect, or limited effect perhaps, on the desire to referee.
I think building on that in phase 3 through the interviews, I asked that question and I said, and everyone, they're not happy with abuse, but it's not at a point where it's just like, I've had enough and I'm leaving. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And quite a few people have put a couple of comments in the chat here just about the fascination in that space and the impact that it can potentially have. Cool. Are there any other questions for Javid before we roll on to the next presentation? Yes. Joseph says, really important research, great work, of course. Interesting to see how retention rates for under 18 referees are only 50%. What would be your recommendations to managers to approach this challenge?
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. It's a great point. I think it's really working closely with them. And I think during the interviews, I talked to a dad and son combo who are referees down in Wellington, and the kid's about 14 years older in high school, and he actually got shadowed by a professional referee. And creating those kind of experiences where you're not doing it by yourself, you've got people around you, you've got systems where people can come together. And I think the biggest thing for me continuing as a referee when I was younger was I had a bunch, 3 or 4 friends that we all were referees, and we all connected through that. So definitely creating more of an environment where people can socially connect, and managers are also touching base and making sure they're not on their lonesome or doing games above their grades and all that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks for your question, Joseph, and great answer, Javid, as well. Cool. Well, I will get Carla, our next presenter, to share your audio and video, and a massive thank you and round of applause on behalf of everybody for Javid. I can't wait to see your final results and can't believe we're at year 4. Time has definitely flown. So Carla joins us from James Cook University, and I believe you're a Corthy member, is that right?
Yeah. Yes. Hi, Jessie and everyone. Yes. Say good morning from Vietnam now because I am in my home country. Yeah.
Oh, welcome. How is Vietnam? What's it like there at this moment?
Oh no, because the COVID situation become worse day by day in Vietnam. And I returned home country at the end of last year to conduct my field work. Luckily, I finished the field work for the phase 1 already, but now I am waiting for the second one. But it's quite challenging time this moment. Yeah.
Yeah, oh my gosh, it sounds like it, and thank you for joining from Vietnam as well.
Yeah. I'm so happy. I'm so happy to join in our conference, because when I look at our stream 1 of the presentation and I think, oh no, all of the cross discipline, and maybe it's just a sum of the people in my discipline in tourism and joining here. But, very happy. And I think it's quite fascinating to listen to all of the presentation related to different aspects. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to broaden the horizons a little bit and see what else is going on. I know I get really bogged in my sports space, so I'm excited to hear your presentation. Do you have some slides you would like to share? There's sort of a computer button with a line through it. That's how you share your slides if you've got any.
Yes, I would like to share my screen, but how I can do it now? Oh no.
Yeah, so underneath our images of our videos, there should be a computer looking button and it's got a red line through it. And if you press that, you can share your screen.
Okay. Wait a moment. Please wait a moment. I will share my screen. Okay. Yes. Can you see my screen and can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can both hear you and see your screen. Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Perfect. I will leave you to it. Looking forward to your presentation.
Yes, and now you can see my full screen, right? Okay. And hi everyone. I'm so happy to be here and share a part of my thesis. My supervisor is Associate Professor Laurie Murphy and Dr. Tin Chen Chen. They are support and give me a lot of the constructive feedback as guidance. Yeah, and I'm really appreciated about them. About my studies, host and tourist interaction is a key to understand any tourism and the interaction shape both host and tourist psychological outcomes in their tourism activities. However, due to the interaction difficulties, both parties may experience misunderstanding, confusion, or even irritation. Therefore, the quality of host and tourist interaction is likely to be influenced negatively. And now, this morning, let's listen the voice of ethnic villagers in identifying the host and tourist interaction difficulty in the central highlands of Vietnam. After reviewing the literatures, the conceptual frameworks is proposed here at these figures. Essentially, the whole and tourist interaction is constructed by two components, physical setting and intensity level of interactions. Physical setting is a context or a place in which the interaction occurs. It may be take place in the public space, in the tourist attractions, or at the local home space. For the intensity levels, according to Su et al. In 2014, they categorize the intensity of interaction into 5 levels from the low to highest. The lowest levels is when birds, hosts, and tourists meet each other, but they don't have any active interaction. In contrast, the highest levels is when both hosts and tourists consider their interaction is a way to fulfill deeper or long-term social needs. For example, they exchanging gifts, making friends, or exchanging their personal contact for the future communication. In such context and intensity levels, Bourbaki may face with the interaction difficulties. And the difficulties including 6 factors due to the coordinated management of meaning theory was introduced in 1980 by Pierre and Cronin. And consequently, 3 main components here will determine the quality of host and tourist interaction. In my study, I have 2 research questions. The first one is what difficulties the host and tourists have with their interaction. And the second one is how do ethnic villagers perceive the quality of host and tourist interaction? So to address those questions, I choose the Central Highlands of Vietnam in my study site. It is located in the west and southwest of Vietnam. It is a mountainous area, especially it's a home to 44 ethnic minority groups in the central in Vietnam. And this region consists 5 provinces. But in my study, I selected 4 villages in 3 provinces, Lâm Đồng, Đắk Lắk, and Kon Tum, due to their tourism development stage, the ethnic tourism projects, as well as the level of local community participation in tourism. In these studies, adopting the qualitative approach, semi-structured interviews were conducted with 31 villagers, and the participants are diverse, including both people involved in tourism and non-involved in tourism. For example, they are the local homestay owner, the restaurant owners, or tourist attraction staff, or the performers or dancers, or just villager heads or the local villagers. And for data analysis, the Leximancer software was applied to generate the major theme and concept map from the input data. In this study, we found 4 major interaction difficulties, including verbal and nonverbal behaviors, episodes, light script, and cultural pattern. The most challenges of host and tourist interaction is about verbal and nonverbal behaviors. These issues refer to theme in the concept map here, language with the rest verbal and dân tộc. Dân tộc, this theme is a Vietnamese term usually used to address the ethnic villagers in a derogatory sense from the majority population or from the domestic tourists. And when the local villagers heard these words from the tourists, immediately they feel upset, uncomfortable, and there's something racial discrimination against them. And it's quite they experience the feeling of inferiors. From episodes issues, these components refer to 4 themes in the concept maps: gong, work, time, and group. That means the local villagers they are only able to serve tourists in a small group. For example, they only provide a homestay service to only one group of tourists. They can't serve two groups at the same time. The another example of like most of the local villagers at the Gom performance, they were hired as a daily earner, so they lack of responsibility and punctuality. At the Gom performance, sometimes most of the tourists they must wait for the start. It means that the local villagers, because they are the performers or dancer in this, and the tourists feel uncomfortable because of their lack of punctualities. Yes, and it means that the venue managers or the supervisor, they also feel have some of the difficulty to manage or to make the satisfactions of tourists. The third one is about last group. Last group refer to two teams in the concept map, including field and group. That means the king people or the tourists, they have the stereotypes perspective to work the ethnic people as a backward and poor or being ignorant. And they feel they inequality in their relation as well, their interaction. And in turn, the local villagers, they feel quite inferior in their interaction. The last issue is about the cultural pattern. This issue refers to a culture team in this concept maps. They cultural gap between the domestic tourists and ethnic villagers. There are quite some of the cultural difference between them. And for example, during the elephant tour, the domestic tourist makes a joke about elephant meat for a delicious meal, for example. And immediately at that time, the Bahut or the local guy, they feel upset, they get angry, and it leads to their reaction offensively, and there is a host and tourist conflict in this situation. So under such difficulties, how about the quality of host and tourist interaction? In our study, the finding found us two team feel and interaction in the concept map reflect the overall quality of host and tourist interaction in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. And their interactions occur in different places, including at the local house, at the tourism service, or in the village. And generally, the villagers, they feel happy to interact with friendly tourists, but occasionally they feel normal or even uncomfortable, disrespectful or discriminated in their interactions. So generally, there is both positive and negative feeling of the interaction for the ethnic villager. And in summary, the finding raised questions how to minimize the interaction difficulty so that we can improve the quality of host and tourist interaction in the Central Highlands. And in the next phase, I will determine some of the practical solutions to answer the question. And this is my the first phase of a study. And thank you so much for your attention. And look forward to hearing your comments or feedback. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing your presentation. It was very fascinating, and some things that coming from a different space I haven't considered before, and the impact that tourism can have on local people within their areas as well. And yeah, I think as a tourist in general, you can often forget that your behaviors can have an impact on the local people. And how that tourism interaction does work. What a fascinating space.
Yeah, it's really interesting when I conduct my fieldwork and I interview the local villagers. For the young dog, it is quite a sensitive word in Vietnam. And as a normal tourist, I don't know how they feel when they heard about these words, because we use it quite normally to address or label ethnic people. But deeply in their hearts, they feel discriminated against them when they heard these words. And it's really meaningful when we found the issue, because we need to have minimize the gap between tourists and the local villagers, so that they can have the mutual relationship in their interaction. Yeah, and it will enhance their positive experience in tourism activity. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul has a question for you. He says, great study. Thank you. Going into your second phase of research, what do you think could be done to improve the interactions of the host and tourism?
Thank you both so much for your recommendation and question. For me, I am preparing to move to the second phase. And, I think we will conduct a workshop with the local villagers and other stakeholders in the village. And I think we need to listen to their opinions or some of the suggestions from the local villagers. I think maybe we will have some of the brochures or some of the leaflets, tell the tourists how about the local tapun or their special cultures, so that we can avoid some of the cultural conflicts when visiting the village and enjoy the tourism activity. Yeah. Thank you, Boris. Yeah. Actually, it's either the second phase, just it's my intention. I hope I can find out some of the practical solution to improve their interaction. Yeah.
Yeah, I think great answer as well, and sounds like a very valuable piece of research, especially for the area you're working with. Lucia, and please comment if I said your name wrong there. Thanks for sharing such an interesting research. I wanted to ask, what was the best part of your data collection so far, and what has fascinated you the most?
Actually, I also collected data from the tourist side. This is the quantitative. Yeah. I distribute the questionnaire to the tourists. But I will move to another phase to analyze, and we'll try to figure out how about the tourist feel and perspective about the ethnic villagers as well as their interaction. Yeah. I think a lot of things to do in the future and the next phase. Yeah. And Lucius, thank you so much.
Awesome. It sounds like a really fascinating piece of work, and I can't wait to hopefully hear the next phase and see what comes next.
Yeah, Chelsea, and hopefully next year I will join in our conference and present my next phase finding, right?
Yes, hopefully. Fingers crossed for you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation and your time. It was a fantastic presentation, and of course cannot wait to see what comes next. And so thank you on behalf of everybody in this audience. Lyndon is up next. Lyndon, if you're in the room, could you please share your video and audio? Awesome.
Hi.
Hello, Lyndon. How are you?
Good. How's everybody?
Going well. Thank you. Lyndon is joining us from AUT, except I believe you are not in Auckland currently.
Nope, I'm in California at the moment.
Excellent. How's California? What time is it there?
It's 5:52 in the early evening, so pretty easy.
Okay.
But things are going well. It's always a little bit, you're not sure what's coming around the corner with the variant, so we're all just being, super careful and doing what we can. But considering everything, we're all doing pretty well.
That's awesome. And Lyndon is an incredible story so far. I think she reached out a couple of weeks ago, having just started her PhD, and eager to present and get to know our SMANS community here ahead of her move to New Zealand. So, yeah, it's been great to connect. If you have some slides, there is that computer-looking button with a red line through it. Underneath.
Yep, I'm just trying to connect with it as we speak.
No worries. How are you finding your AUT experience so far?
It's been really good. It's been kind of crazy, just kind of surreal, but loving it and really excited to be part of it. And, just considering everything going on, just really thankful to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've just nailed it there. I think it's such a blessing that we have what we do at the moment. Awesome. We can see your screen there.
Awesome.
Perfect. I will leave you to take it away.
All right. So thanks, Chelsea. So hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me on today. So like Chelsea said, my name is Lyndon, and I am a first-year PhD student. Yikes. At the Oakland University of Technology. I'm currently in California at the moment. I'm at home is where I'm from, but I plan to move down to Oakland as soon as possible, borders permitting, and hopefully everybody down there is safe. So before I get started, I would just like to acknowledge Dr. Michael Naylor and Dr. Melody Johnston, who have been incredible supervisors thus far and really just helping me get up and going. I know this has been a first time for all of us in a lot of regards in terms of helping PhD students, and over Zoom and getting up and running. So a huge thank you, and really for investing in my passion and my dream to do this. So a little bit about me real quick. I graduated in 2019 from the University of Oregon with my bachelor's in journalism and PR. And then I just graduated in May from New York University with a master's in sports business. And then I jumped straight in here August 1 with the AUT. And so far our working title and what we're looking at is going to be marketing women's basketball in New Zealand. Obviously, we're pretty early on in the process, but we're going to narrow it down. But my goal for this project is to really help, people at things like Basketball New Zealand, Sport NZ, and other entities really find a way to market and grow basketball for girls and women specifically, because there is definitely something there. And then I think, and what I'm hoping to do right now is use a tactical market, a traditional marketing approach to look at this scope with. And I think that'll be really applicable knowledge as I continue to have conversations with existing industry contacts, and then also findings in the literature review, as well as conversations with Michael and Mel. So I'm really looking forward to getting to know everybody, getting to see how this progresses, especially because I'm actually immersed in the women's basketball space in New Zealand already, and kind of working with promotion and marketing. So I'm excited to see how, hopefully we can find something to help ultimately grow the game. So just a quick agenda. I would love to give just kind of a brief background on basketball and where it's the current state of it in the country in New Zealand. And then we're going to go into the research purpose. And so why we're doing this. And then some potential design elements for what the study is going to have. And then just a quick conclusion at the end. And so to give some background on the current state of basketball, it's been cited as one of the fastest growing sports in the country. It's on pace, if not already surpassed rugby and netball, which has been pretty huge. But unlike other sports, it's had some issues, and that is not a centralized system for athletes. There's not one coherent pathway for athletes to take and to be part of it. And this is dependent on location, income, and of course, gender. And this really adds up to be a significant challenge for not only recruiting new players, which is what they're trying to do, but it also has been hard to retain existing players and some of the few professional players they have because of pre-existing relationship management issues with Basketball New Zealand. And they've really invested very little in marketing it. And so just to give you a couple numbers, so from Active NZ and their participation survey in 2019, it was based on ages 5 to 17. Females, they do tend to have more barriers to entering into sport than their male counterparts. And then also they mentioned that they're either too busy, too tired, it's too hard to motivate themselves, or they can't afford it, or they're not confident enough or not fit enough. Those are reasons why they're not necessarily getting into it. And so those are just some of the issues that the sport is combating, that they need to grow. They do feel, I think you can see this final bullet, they're feeling undervalued because there's not a ton of coverage. So that doesn't put a great light there. And so because the coverage really right now is minimal, and the way the Basketball New Zealand has been handling it has been to really, especially for the younger girls, is something called Girls.Game, which is a thing that they've had, a program that the governing body has ran to get coaches and elite players into schools, mainly primary and intermediate sides, just to kind of introduce them. But that's really been about it. But there are only about 6 media outlets right now that Basketball New Zealand has designated like credible to allow people to cover it. So there hasn't been very much. And so, but the coverage that has been there has been mostly secondary school champs. And then the semi-professional league, the South NBL Women, which is supposed to be happening right now. So again, this can often leave female players feeling undervalued, and their voices just seem to be unheard from Basketball New Zealand and other coaches, and many other cases, other sport administrators. But there is a market. The promising thing is there is a market for women's sport, and Nielsen did a study called The Rise of Women's Sports, and there's about 72 million people worldwide who are interested in women's basketball and they want to follow it. And there was also something that showed that when they market women's sport in New Zealand, it's really promoting the leadership, value, participation, visibility as those key values. And what they've seen as the few camps that coaches and other maybe some their players would do is they embody those values to help the participants become better people and not just better athletes. So that really draws me to the purpose of this research that I'm about to undertake, which is to dig deeper on specific aspects of marketing basketball to women and young girls, and understand the current tactics and then how that affects their ability and wanting to participate. And then hopefully we can get some recommendations out of that. So as of right now, the potential design elements, there's a couple ideas that I'm floating around with right now, but there's going to be different factors, many of which are going to be done through focus groups and interviews. So one idea that I've been playing with is a focus group with girls and women recreational players, as well as those going the high performance pathway. What makes a basketball environment fun? I've spoken to people in the industry about how girls don't want to be playing necessarily an all men's league, which is understandable, but what would they find is what's their perception of fun? Another thing could be, a content analysis of promotional tools. So that would be through, whether that's the Basketball New Zealand website, how FIBA, the international body for basketball, how they promote the sport, and just some of those other outlets, just how are those tools and social media assets, how are they presenting it currently? Another one that I like is the interview with parents has their roles as like decision makers in their daughters' lives, and how does that affect the engagement? Do they like what they see, or is that are there just too many issues or negative perceptions that they don't want to deal with it? Another potential element could be working with coaches and seeing how do they create positive experiences to keep players engaged, because the sport has so many tenured coaches, or a number of them who are trying to help. So what are some of their strategies? And then another one is a brand association. So talking to players, talking to coaches and people in the space about when they hear something like Basketball New Zealand, or an association name, or the premier tournament, which is Rise to Prominence Hoop Nation. When they hear that, what do you think of? And so other ideas, thinking about maybe doing a study on Girls.Game, that program in specific, just kind of seeing how effective that is standalone. And then also maybe there may be a thread with looking at media coverage and the lack of it, and maybe how that switches things up. So just in conclusion, this project again is just positioned to kind of help make recommendations down the road to see if how many trying to get girls involved and women too. Right now, it's going to be narrowed down, but looking at both younger and older participants. And then these elements would be designed to include those in there. And I'm also in the early stages of trying to narrow it down to find a common thread that ties these ideas together. And I think that's my biggest next step right now. Hopefully that will be coming in the literature review in the next few weeks. And I'm also looking at a theoretical framework. I'm currently entertaining the social ecological model, but I'm open to other options. And so for moving on from here, just looking forward to you all kind of hearing your input, and if there are other articles that you think in this space would be really helpful, or other scholars that maybe are immersed in marketing or kind of other women's sport and development, or some of these other elements that would help me down the line, that would be awesome. But in the meantime, I look forward to getting to know and working with you at some point, and thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thanks for your presentation, Lyndon. What a great area of research as well. I cannot wait to see what you discover over the next 3 or 4 years and the direction that you decide to take it in. Marketing of women's sport, to women, for women, of women's sport, it's just so important, and an underrated area at that.
Yeah, and it's been crazy too a little bit because and we've had conversations in the basketball community about this too, where they're being diverse about who's running the game, because a lot of it's particularly male dominated, and how unfortunate, or just kind of a room for improvement, that to have a female maybe running this side, and maybe even somebody of Maori Pacifica descent, just because that's also a large part of the population. So there's a lot of room for improvement there, and all areas that hopefully this scope will encompass at some point.
Yeah, absolutely, and no doubt it will. And there's some great support coming from our audience here as well. I know Casey does a lot of work in the women's sports space, particularly around fan engagement and fan stories. So whether that can play somewhat into your research and study as well, she could be a great one to link in with.
Yeah. So thank you all for the kind words, and thank you for welcoming me in and allowing me to present. And I look forward to getting to hopefully see you all in person sometime soon.
Fingers crossed. We certainly hope so. I do have a couple of questions for you myself. And before I do that, there's people like Katie here in the audience as well who are happy to chat about this further. So feel free to reach out to anybody from our community here. It's definitely a important space. But what's driven that sort of passion for basketball and women's participation, and how we market that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's actually, I don't want to say it's random, because it's become less random over the years, but this is coming from a person who was never able to participate in sport because of cardiology issues and things like that. But I always saw, and I came from a family that respects women and women's sport, and really just came from a family of sport. And then I just love the storytelling behind it. I think there's a lot there. And but a lot of those, I've saw a lot of these athletes and people in the space are a lot like, we're all kind of the same. And that, I may not be an athlete, but they really resonated with me. And, they're just like I am. And, especially in New Zealand too, and Australia, and even here in the US, they're normal people, but they have these extraordinary gifts. And, they really helped me on a personal level, which was really cool. And I think I found this again 2 years ago. And so how is this be a way to share those stories that are so important, that allow people, just kind of help maybe get them further appreciation. And I thought, maybe something down the line, just better pay. In the US, we talked about it a lot. I know in other countries around the world, I know Australia too. So just kind of those foundational elements. And then when you find a group of people that want to move forward in the same direction, that just put the fuel on the fire.
Yeah, absolutely. And a great reason for doing the PhD and the study and immersing yourself in this space too. if you haven't had a look through it yet, there is I've forgotten the name of it, but a book recently edited by Emma Sherry and Katie Rowe that is all about women's sport and includes quite a few stories on both participation, media, marketing, all of those aspects. So could be a worthy read if you haven't. I'm happy to share that with you if you haven't come across it yet.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. And I've seen a lot of Katie's work, and it's also just, knowing that. And it's also, I think another thing too that I want to add, and especially for New Zealand, is, the greats that because of the relationship management and the way that they have been treated, some of them are starting to walk away, and they're trying to leave the game in a better place than where they found it. But the way that they're being treated, part of it is just not getting the recognition for it. And to grow the game, you need to have those people there. And so I think this is part of it that's driving it too, is trying to help preserve it and help grow it moving forward with, finding a revenue stream that will support these women. So that way they can train full time and they don't have to worry about, and then maybe find some level that someone will connect with them and be like, hey, well, I want to invest in this, or I want to bring you on board as a brand ambassador, just to try and do that. But, and so I think that's been a large part of it for me too. And then just, keep the participation rates coming. So that way they can have, others can have this down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And marketing is such an important role in all of those parts of it. And I cannot wait to see what this is like. I think I've said that about 6 times to you already, but it is definitely a fascinating space. So great work so far. And thank you so much for sharing your insights and less than a month into your project too. I think, that's incredible that you've come with the work you have today and already progressed so far in the space of 20 days. So well done on that.
Thank you, everybody. And thanks everyone for the lovely comments. And I'm looking forward to connecting with each of you and hopefully learning more and really immersing myself in hear what your expertise are too, and looking forward to the rest of the day.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lyndon. Next up, we have Paul Bell. So Paul, if you are able to share your audio and video, this is your time. So Paul is a fellow PhD candidate from Swinburne University and the Sport Innovation Research Group, which I am also a part of. So I've had the absolute pleasure of working alongside Paul for the last couple of years. Welcome,
Hey,
Paul. How are you feeling today?
Yeah, good. Thanks, yourself.
Good, thank you. I'm very much looking forward to your presentation. I think Paul works in such a fascinating space, and he's definitely encouraged a different way of thinking in relationship with how I approach my physical activity through technology and tracking there as well. So and handles this space very well. Before we get underway, Paul, what's sort of your motivating interests in wearable tech?
Probably twofold. I come not so much from the sports side, but from the wearable tech, say in employment and that sort of background. But when I first got into sort of researching datification in society, it was more about how I was seeing people like my family using technology like self-tracking and that. So I grew up in the 80s. I was a kid in the 80s, and my family, my aunties, my uncles, they're very much about stranger danger. They had all the doors locked and things like that. And now I watch them act on like social media and on their iPhones and that, and they literally act like they leave the doors open all the time. And that sort of just really got me thinking is how people interact and how people use different technologies and the datification of society. And it's really fascinating to me how people interact with technology. And that sort of led me to now looking at how athletes and the athlete's body intersect and interact with technology.
Awesome. Very much looking forward to seeing what you have for the rest of today, and very interesting backstory to what got you into technology there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but I think that's probably okay. I'm happy to leave and let you take it away.
Not a problem. I'll just put it on share there, so get it all set up. So Excellent. So ready to go here. So yeah, as Chel said, my name is Paul Bow, and I'm into my second year of my PhD at Swinburne University in Melbourne, Australia. So firstly, I would like to acknowledge the great guidance and support that I have from my supervisors, Professor Emma Sherry, Dr. Paul Skyfleet, and Dr. Katia Peshinkaina. So in today's presentation, I'd like to explain the theoretical underpinnings of my research project. My project aims to understand the effective experiences of women Australian rules footballers with digital self-tracking. So as we spoke about before, digital self-tracking is performed through sensor-driven devices, which are worn on the body like Fitbits and Apple Watches, which transmit back to processors or smart devices producing quantitative data. So in different sporting contexts, the athlete's body is constantly measured, observed and tracked to produce quantified data of sensed, embodied and performed actions. However, there is little research, especially in emerging women's sports, regarding how the athlete experiences the practice. There is also little research into how the athlete interprets the tracking action and imparts these understandings onto their identity, selfhood and body. To understand women Australian rules footballers' digital self-tracking experiences, there needs to be a consideration for the processual actions of monitoring the body. The process of tracking the athlete's body requires a complex interaction between the human body and technology. This relationality between the footballer and their tracking device is where the theoretical perspectives of my study pivots. So in my study, the post-humanism perspective of vital materialism will be applied. Vital materialism will offer understandings of the intersection of the athlete body and digital technology. Leveraging vital materialist theory, this presentation will then provide a discussion of the background, theory and framework that can inform the study of women footballers' experiences with digital self-tracking. Vital materialism was conceptualized by political theorist and philosopher Jane Bennett. Vital materialism focuses on revealing vibrancy, force, potentiality, and importance to all matter. Matter in a vital materialist paradigm refers to all animate things, objects, bodies, spaces, and places, and inanimate knowledge like social, cultural, and biological beliefs and understandings. In this respect, an artifact of technology like a smart device can have effects on the human body. For example, the haptic sensation of an Apple Watch vibrating when the wearer has been inactive too long, or the impromptu hop, skip or jump around the living room before bed to get those final 250 steps or close that last activity ring. This is the vibrancy and force of digital self-tracking. The digital device interacting with the tracker, creating different feelings and intensities. This is vital materialism. A further critical component of vital materialism is that it decenters the human from the social inquiry. In this respect, the research is focused on the relational connections of the subject-object. So this being said, in my study, the relational connections are the footballer and their digital self-tracking device. This allows for an uncovering of the different effects that are produced between the player and their tracking device. Effects are intensities felt through the body and recognized as feelings created by both the player and their device. So the sudden jolt to stand felt when the Apple Watch vibrates, the anxiety to complete your 250 steps before bed, and that sense of achievement when the final activity ring is closed. These are all effects felt through the body and created together between the tracker and their digital device. Post-humanism perspectives such as vital materialism have been applied across sporting context in past research. Perko Markula is quite prominent in this respect with her research into the body and its movement and how neoliberal and governmental beliefs impact normative understandings of the body, especially the construction of normative ideals of the feminine body. Taking the lead from Markula, Holly Thorpe and Marianne Clark have interrogated social, cultural and biological discourses which influence how endurance sportswomen understand their body. There has also been post-humanism research to understand the relational links of talent development in elite sport, athlete identity formation of women wheelchair tennis players, as well as problematizing the negative discourses of mixed martial arts fighting. This scholarship is small but growing, and my study will look to add to this, as there is yet to be a vital materialist analysis of the effective experiences of women Australian rules footballers with digital self-tracking. So I now want to quickly outline my methodological direction to operationalise vital materialism in my study. The methodology guiding the study will be digital ethnography. Digital ethnography is focused on researching people and their relationships and engagements with digital technology in their everyday world, and how these everyday relations shape the sensory digital material environments of the participants. Digital ethnography calls for a relational approach between the participants and the digital technology, which also marries well with vital materialism. Methods supporting the digital ethnography will be focus groups, qualitative surveys, and video reenactments of the players fitting and operating their self-tracking devices. I'm just about to undertake this data collection, but I've tested these instruments through piloting, and I'd like to share with you some of the responses I received to demonstrate vital materialist thinking. So during the piloting of recreational trackers, I asked the question, could you describe how digital self-tracking makes you feel? The responses I received to the questions, which you can see on the slide, include a mix of positive and negative feelings. For example, happy, motivated, proud, sad, pressured and low. These adjectives described by the participants are in fact effects, which are relationally produced by the tracker and their device. These effects are intensities felt through the body. Once felt, these intensities are recognized by the mind as feelings. Together, the tracker and the device created these sensations, and this is vital materialism at work. The vibrancy and force of the device has contributed to the tracker feeling either happy or sad. Thus, vital materialism helps focus the research project on not understanding what digital self-tracking is, but what it can do. And with these processual understandings of women Australian rules footballers' digital self-tracking practices, the study will be able to offer a number of benefits to the players and their clubs. This includes offering empowerment to women athletes as they develop greater know-how of options, choices, and approaches to engaging with digital self-tracking. Maximise performance of women athletes by learning how to optimise outputs, work with their data, and apply this to their fitness, exercise, and sports activities, especially away from their clubs. Further benefits in the study include ensuring optimised wearability for the players by understanding the functionality and usability requirements of wearing digital equipment in an AFLW, VFLW context. And finally, the study can encourage positive behaviours for women footballers through improving the athlete's understanding of best practice in digital self-tracking for positive self-image and women's athletes' identity. There are also benefits offered to the clubs of the players involved in the study. Through greater understanding of the players' experiences of digital self-tracking, the club can ensure that their players are reaching optimal performance levels through best practice frameworks of operating technology-led performance monitoring. And the club can be a sports leader in the way it understands and applies digital self-tracking practices for women athletes in emerging sporting arenas. The key takeaway that I'd like to leave you with is that through vital materialist thinking, a more user-centric approach to the practice of digital self-tracking can be delivered for women Australian rules footballers. I look forward to returning to the SMANS community at the end of the year at our conference in Canberra to share some of my preliminary findings of my data collection and demonstrate further the vibrancy and force of digital self-tracking among women Australian rules footballers. So that's the end of my presentation today. So thank you for taking the time this morning, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. But alternatively, there's my contacts if you'd like to reach out and have a chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Great work.
Not a problem.
Yeah, and Lyndon's made a comment there about equally how interesting this research is and how excited we are to see what's next. Tell me, what's planned with your data collection and these next steps after the pilot?
Most definitely. So yeah, we're just currently at the moment organising the sample through some clubs. So we're definitely going to be looking at some AFLW, but also some state level players. So one of the sort of key factors, I really only focused on the theoretical framework, but one of the key factors for the study and the reason why I've actually chosen AFLW footballers is that research suggests that that athletes at different levels of experience understand and accept and engage with digital self-tracking at different levels. So the AFLW or Women in Australian Rules Football is a really interesting sample site because you've got this mix of players like Erin Phillips and I know Shani Layton's retired, but similar players like that who come from former elite backgrounds. But then you've also got a large cohort of semi-professional players and players that are amateur. So it really opens up this idea. So we're definitely excited about looking at both state level and AFLW level players.
Yeah, that's I cannot wait to see what comes out from your work with the footballers. And there's heaps of support coming through for your team as well, and great to see a Swinburne representation here too.
Yeah.
I don't know about the few of us that are out there in the audience, but since I've been engaging with Paul and understanding his work, my thoughts around my own smartwatch, I've got one underneath my shirt here, and that relationship I have with the data and the haptics that come with it, it's just really fascinating. I'm not sure if we want to throw to the audience, Paul, but just get everyone else's.
Yeah, well, I wonder whether I sort of probably if I was in a more live setting, I would have, instead of showing the pilot data, I would have probably asked the audience if whoever uses a smartphone, do you have that? Sometimes it might be a little bit illogical, but that sense of like, I have to do those steps before I go to bed, or I have to continue tracking to get the 6 kilometers up. And it's really this embodiment of the technology and this vibrancy and force that I talk about from the device, in which interacting between the two, and it creates this real distributive agentic quality, which is really interesting, and it's in sport, it's in our activity, but it's all through life in the way in which datification is just reaching us more and more. So I think it's really interesting to sort of consider how that sort of interacts in our daily life.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan has a little bit of a question here.
Yeah.
How is the uptake from the sector been? Is there interest from clubs and athletes?
Yeah, most definitely. So we're actually, just initially we've started talking to some clubs, and it's been actually some really positive feedback, and we've been really encouraged by that. And I think that we talked about the benefits there is the things like being able to empower and maximize performance, and in the AFLW and emerging women's sports. So this could be extended out to things like rugby league and sports in which the athletes are semi-professional. So they spend a lot of time away from the clubs. Most of the women's footballers are only on single-year contracts, which means that in between their contracts, they can't have contact with their clubs. So a lot of the time during the year, it falls to themselves to keep their conditioning up. And this is also balanced with a lot of them are things like their paramedics, their nurses, their teachers, they work on building sites. So they have to be able to manage the load of being a professional and a semi-professional athlete, but also working a full-time job. So by optimizing and maximizing their feelings and their understandings of how they use a digital device, and then get that device to work for them, has been a really positive thing, which industry has really thought that could work for them. And it's a twofold thing in which it helps the clubs, but it empowers the athletes as well, and looks for more of this empowering type idea of the technology, instead of sometimes that sort of technology can get pigeonholed into a panoptic or a surveillance type device. So it's very positive in that respect.
Yeah, what do you see as something that the clubs and the management of athletes can take away from the work you're doing at the moment?
Most definitely, I think it's creating this user-centric sort of focus to the digital tracking. And this is where there's this real, not so much a dichotomy, but a juxtaposition to where when you put in, and going back to my research where you're putting in sort of tracking in an employment situation, but it's an employment situation in clubs and athletes, is you have a power dynamic between the club and the athlete, and that power dynamic is uneven. So there needs to be this user-centric approach to where there can be complete transparency to the way in which this performance tracking is being used, and it's being used for what it is, and the players understand for what it is. So it's not something which is being used coercively to try and sort of track the players out or anything like that. So definitely to be open, to be upfront, and through creating this user-centric approach of understanding how the athlete feels, I think is a very positive way in which that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, such practical applications from this research potentially too. It's an exciting space to be in, and even overlap with like Lyndon's work, as we just saw as well, how we perhaps can marry up the two field areas there as well.
Most definitely.
Yeah, excellent. Well, if there's no more questions there from the audience, I will thank you and congratulations on your work so far, Paul. Looking forward to those preliminary findings at Canberra SMANS in December.
Most definitely. Hope to see everyone there in person. Fingers crossed.
Oh, hopefully.
Thanks, Charles.
Thanks, Paul. And next up, we have Eleanor Faulkner, who is also a fellow Swinburne PhD student. She is with us here at the Sport Innovation Research Group. So, Ali, when you're ready, if you can share your audio and video, that would be fantastic. So Ali is in her first year of her PhD and has been an absolute delight to work with so far as well, and really looking forward to her presentation and work that she has done so far with leadership. Awesome. Cool. She's just coming in now.
There we go. Is everything working?
Cool, you are on. How are you going, Ali?
I'm okay. I just got kicked out and then came back in again. I was all confused.
Oh, no worries. Hopin is a little moody sometimes. It's a great platform, but yeah. Sometimes
we'll get there.
It likes to play up. So yeah, this is your first SMANS, I believe.
Yes, first one's looking forward to it, and then obviously the big one in December as well, so exciting.
Absolutely, super exciting. And is this your first year? What's inspired you to do your PhD?
So I was in my master's at the back end of last year and just had this like inquisitive itch to look into organizations. Having come from a sporting background myself, it was just one of those things where I really wanted to jump in and see what was going on in there, and obviously not seeing change happen within organizations, which is obviously what my study is based on. It kind of really got me thinking that maybe I should just jump into PhD and get some good research out of it.
Excellent, and a great decision. Not biased in me saying that whatsoever. Well, we're still running a little bit ahead of time, but as long as no one has any issues with that, I'm happy to keep pressing on.
So just checking you've got the right screen.
Let's see.
Which screen have you got? There we go.
We have the right screen, and I will leave you to it. Thanks, Ellen.
Perfect. Thank you. So, hi everyone. I'd like to thank obviously my supervisors named on the screen. So, Dr. Adam Karg, Dr. Emma Sherry, Dr. Jonathan Robertson, and Dr. Sen Sandaya, who have been a great help to date and who will be supporting me along my journey through this PhD. Today, I will be discussing how leaders play a role in the change process in Australian national sport organisations. So before I begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and their elders past and present, who are the traditional owners of the land of which I am currently located. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands across Australia as well, their elders, ancestors, cultures and heritage. Before I delve into how leaders might play a role within the change process, I'd like to give you a brief introduction of the current sporting environment. So as a result of professionalisation and commercialisation, the Australian sport industry faces increasing complexity and an ongoing significance of change spanning across social, structural, technological and governance challenges. Consequently, organisations manage and navigate change. How organisations manage and navigate change is of an ongoing importance. So if they're not managed well, functioning or performance is threatened, where organisations risk maintaining the old ways, obviously retaining inefficiencies, and obviously this leads to increased levels of uncertainty and a higher turnover rate. So having come from a sporting background, as already mentioned, the past 16 years being back home in the UK and having a huge interest in sport, this has inspired me to investigate the reasons behind why change doesn't happen within sport organisations and to consider if this is down to the leader and their perceptions. The research question, which is currently going through ongoing development at this present time, what are the facilitators and barriers of change in national sport organisations in Australia? Obviously, this has the purpose of this research is to explore organisational change through the investigation of leader perceptions, specifically focusing on social change and the barriers to change. An effective model which I have identified to explore these organisational changes, and obviously which has previously been demonstrated by research, is institutional theory. In the case of this current study, each Australian sport organisation is referred to as an institution. So by institutions, we refer to the routinized, taken for granted sets of ideas and beliefs and actions that are used in society. These can be seen both formally and informally through institutions, which can be both within macro and micro environments. Previous research to date within the area of organisational change is mainly informed from a micro-sociological perspective and is generally used as a means to argue the meanings of how leaders interpret situations and the situations that they find themselves in. This also includes how their interpretations can influence future actions they might take. And this allows for further understanding of why the change does or doesn't happen. Although it is recognised innovation changes sport organisations and their operations, little is known about the institutional responses and how entrepreneurs may have to alter, maintain or disrupt institutional arrangements. When analysing the broader institutional theory, it has been identified that there are many institutional shocks that provoke change through organisations that are sudden, quick and which shift everyday practices, which deinstitutionalise environments and organisational fields. This is where Newton and colleagues highlighted 5 different types of shocks that are faced by institutions, these being social, material, technological, regulatory and ecological. This study will take a focus towards the social changes faced by institutions and how leaders play a role within this change process through their perceptions of change. A few examples of social change can be seen within the word cloud on the right, where a few examples come from social changes such as gender, race, and class. When looking at real-world examples of this within the sporting organisational context, the International Olympic Committee launched a bold initiative on gender equality to assist with removing those barriers that continue to prevent women and girls in sport, and particularly within the elite sport. This initiative, developed by the IOC, aims to appoint more women to leadership roles within the administration and governance of the international federations through 25 gender equality recommendations, covering 5 key themes: sport, portrayal, governance, funding and HR, and monitoring communications. Further to this, the Black Lives Matter movement has had a series of crises which stretches back decades of anti-racist activism and has gained new intensity over the recent years. This new intensity was present in the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games, where we not only saw individuals, but also international governing organisations, clubs and teams, and grassroots performing activism. And finally, when discussing class, existing research has revealed that people from the most affluent households were most likely to reach the MBA. We see similar patterns in broader society and through organisations. Having a financial means makes it more likely someone will be successful in other ventures, whether those activities involve dribbling a ball or starting a business, or even performing in a school. Having a lack of resources makes this more challenging. So this study will focus more so on the social challenges that are faced by institutions through the maintenance by institutional leaders. So when looking at the institutional environment, institutional theory can be operationalized to evaluate leaders as they play an essential role within the process. The diagram that you can see on screen is a short snippet of the direction of this research and how institutional theory can be applied. Within the institutional field, there are multiple types of institutional shocks, as already mentioned and previously highlighted, which in turn triggers sport organisations to assess their needs to change. Within this process, Lawrence and colleagues highlights that there are three forms of change through the creation, maintenance, and disruption of institutions. This study will focus specifically on the maintenance and how institutional entrepreneurs, so the leaders, can either be optimistic or cynical of the changes. However, what we do know is that leaders are critical in this change process. They've been recognised as being able to facilitate learning through an environment which nurtures and establishes a sense of equality and trust, while enabling for failure to be viewed as a learning process. An example of this can be seen when leaders apply their influence to achieve a level of organisational learning through transformational leadership, strategic leadership, and supportive leadership. When we look at cynicism and optimism, these are defined very similarly, yet they provide different outcomes towards the way we look at change. It is proposed that cynicism emerges from dispositional attribution, so the blame of others, for failed change outcomes, where blame can arise from both a lack of ability, a lack of motivation, or even both. Cynicism is seen as negatively and is defined by Dean and colleagues as an attitude composed of beliefs that affect and the behavioural attitudes and tendencies towards an organisation, where optimism is regarded as a positive attitude or a mood or attitude associated with an expectation about the social or material future, one which the evaluator regards as socially desirable to his advantage or to his pleasure. The way in which I want to approach the methods and outcomes is still in the development stages based on the empirical research to address the main research question, which I've previously outlined. Initially, interviews will be undertaken with a representative sample of Australian sports leaders, where CEOs will be the focus group, as they are the leaders and senior decision makers of organisations. The proposed organisational sample will target national and state sport organisations within the Australian sporting system. Given the need to focus on a larger and more complex organisations, sports that meet the definition of corporate sports, for example, those who generate sufficient commercial revenue, employ professional staff and athletes, will be the primary focus. In the interview stages, questions will be seeking to gain an understanding on the forms of change required within the sport industry, the perceptions and experience of leaders who seek to make the changes within the sports organisations, and to highlight some of the impacts of change and processes used within the change process. Towards the outcomes of the research, the findings can help organisations in understanding the barriers to change and how these may play a role within cynicism to change. This can assist in providing a framework to action change within the sports industry. So thank you very much for your time. And as previously mentioned, this is still all in the development stages. So I'm completely open to feedback and happy to take conversations offline as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Ellie. How did you feel after your first presentation for SMAMS?
Nerve-wracking, but we got there.
No, that was excellent, and you did so well. Are there any questions for Ali on her PhD so far? So I'm keen to hear from you, Ali. What do you see as the next steps for your work here and approaching your thesis?
I guess the next steps would be just kind of looking into how the methodology and how I would go about that, handling the different types of research and data collection as well. Obviously, that's kind of all up in the air at the minute, and I have some ideas, but it's a matter of just kind of pinpointing the best way to get the research, the data from that data collection. So at the minute, that's kind of at the forefront of the mind, but I'm really looking forward to getting stuck in. Obviously, I'm only 6 months in at the minute, so yeah, I've just been writing away and delving through all that literature at the minute.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're making some great sense of it. I think your framework so far looks really good. We have a question from Tim here. Do you think the leaders will be honest?
I guess this is something that I'm going to be working towards, and I guess this is something where it's going to be a matter of kind of creating a rapport and that having those conversations, kind of lightening the mood within those interviews, and trying to kind of extract that information from them. I think it will be quite difficult in the initial stages, but I think once I get on a roll and be able to kind of make them, it might be a matter of having to have secondary interviews to try and see if we can try and extract that data. But I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully they will be honest.
Absolutely, and I think that ties into Adrian's question here as well. Do you think you will get willing leaders to reply?
I think so. I think that people will reply. I think what they might want to do is, obviously, anonymity is going to be a key factor in this, because anything they say could be hugely detrimental to a sport organisation. So it might have to become very explicitly anonymous, should I say? That it cannot be shared. But it's one of those things where I'm hoping that they'll be willing to share, because I'm going to be looking at the tenure of the leaders as well. So it won't just be looking at someone who's brand new within a position. It's going to be looking hopefully within a 3-year period to a 6-year period to someone who's been there for 7+ years. And obviously, when you're currently looking at those CEOs of the national sport organisations, there's such a huge range already of people to hopefully be able to bring in some different data, and also looking into those who have left organisations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got quite a few questions coming through. So Mark has asked, what's led you to explore commercial and corporate sports?
The main reason to want to look into commercial and corporate sports was actually last year when I was studying my master's. I think I undertook a unit where I was just so inquisitive of what had happened with the Australian Olympic Committee and when Fiona de Jong was the CEO, and how she tried to enact change through a cultural audit, which very evidently brought out, I think it was 17 cultural recommendations, and obviously last year when looking into this and studying through it, not many of those recommendations, I guess, had been achieved based on her reign as CEO, and that's kind of what led me to want to look into that corporate sport, commercial sport area, to try and figure out why the changes aren't happening, and whether it is towards optimism or cynicism towards change.
Yeah, and that ties somewhat into what Carlos, to maybe extend on that further, is asking, and have you considered different perceptions of what institutional change would be in big versus small NSOs?
No, I haven't considered that at present, but that is something that I will take on board. I think it would be a matter of, I guess, because the main aim at present is to look at those bigger NSOs, so the main 14 Olympic national sport organizations. So I will keep that in mind, and that might be a potential additional swerve of research, which might come from the data collection.
Interesting. And thanks for the suggestion or question there, Carlos, as well. I think that's the beauty of these forums, is it can help us to have a look and identify these things. Joseph has a couple of points here. He highlights how interesting this research is, and how important it is to our industry, being the CEOs and the leaders are essentially the gatekeepers to change in that sense. And he's just added a note here, wondering whether a scale or tool exists or could be developed to examine openness to change or organizational adaptability when it comes to change. Just as sort of a thought-provoking point. Have you had a look at any scales or tools or in that particular realm?
I haven't looked at scales and tools, but one of the things that I have been considering is whether it affects the outcome of change. So whether it's a matter of the change. So if someone is more optimistic, whether that change is going to be highly evident, as opposed to a slight cynicism might cause a change or a non-change in an organization where they perceive to be making the change within the wider organization, but not really. There might not be anything to show from it. So that's kind of, I guess, around the organization adaptability area-ish. But I think, again, that might be slightly outside the scope at present, and it might be a matter of, again, delving into that for further research. But thank you, Joseph. I appreciate the question.
Perfect. And some great audience responses and questions there. And thank you for sticking with us and answering those questions. It's a very interesting piece of work, and looking forward to seeing how this develops over the next couple of years, and hopefully seeing more of it presented at SMENAs.
Hopefully so.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ali.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Lucia. If you are in the room, please share your video and audio and we can get underway. So excellent. Lucia is from University of Otago. She is in the tourism management space as well. So I'm assuming Corthy representative there, which is exciting to have on board here. So she's exploring the relationships between tourism and emergency management in New Zealand, particularly with disaster resilience. So quite a fascinating topic area that I am looking forward to hearing about, as I'm sure we all are in the room. Awesome. Welcome, Lucia. How are you today?
Oh,
it's just breaking up for me. That could be my end. How are we going?
Can you hear me, Chelsea?
I can hear you. That's perfect.
All right.
Yes.
Hi.
How
Hi.
are you today?
How are you?
Going well. Looking forward to your presentation. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm at the Center for Sustainability with the University of Otago, and I'm supervised by Caroline Orchiston and James Hyam. And yeah, as my title says, I'm looking at the between emergency regulators, understanding how tourists are managed during times. And I'm towards the end of my first year, so going to data collection. As Javid said before, I'm in New Zealand, and we have just entered lockdown, so a little bit of disruption for that. But yeah, hopefully it won't be too long.
No, hopefully it won't be too long and you can continue moving forward with your data collection. And great to have another first year student presenting with us. I think such a great opportunity for that. if you can share your screen, that would be
Mhm. I just. Just 1 second.
no worries.
Let's see.
Perfect. We have the slides up.
Okay. Yeah.
Awesome.
Just okay. Can you see
Yeah,
it?
that looks great. Perfect. So if you're ready to go, I'm happy to leave you to it.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay.
Thank you.
So, hi everyone. Good morning. Here at Chicago, and I spent some time today at a bit of my research, which look relation between tourism and emerging management. I would specifically have a focus on because, as I said, I'm about to start my data collection. So any suggestions will be, much appreciated. So just to give you a little bit of context, my project is funded by Resilience to Nature's Challenges program, which is one of the 11 team towards priority science land. And I am part of the room within test challenge in discipline areas that cover a range of different hazards research. And with my colleagues of the rural tourism workstream, we are looking at ways to increase tourist resilience in New Zealand and help the tourism sector better prepare for future events. So the cost of pre-COVID tourism here in strong growth in of 3.8 year, and typical destination areas with beautiful scenery and pristine environment for sound, which is here slide. On the busiest day, there could be around 6,000 visitors, mainly by the remoteness of the place. Applications in terms of the risk, being limited infrastructure, vulnerable transport corridors, little or no local hospital capacity, the access to emergency service. When February 2020 floods washed away and destroyed multiple parts of Milford Road, as you can see from the photos, more than 300 people remained trapped and thousands were forced to flee. All over New Zealand, there are places exposed. And because visitors are mobile and they're difficult to account for, in case of a disaster, it's difficult to understand where they are and how to manage their welfare. And this requires disaster preparedness and close collaboration and emergencies. The problem, in fact, is that we don't know after the tourism sector shares information and collaborates with emergency services. So this is the reason for my project. So for my PhD, I'm using a mixed methods approach to explore the relationship between tourism and emergency management in New Zealand. And because the connection between the two sectors before and aim project is to have a full picture of the needs. So first, I want to understand to what extent is tourism covered in New Zealand civil defense and how are risk and disaster resilience improved. I'm using to as key documents and I'm including documents such as the cover strategy, the sustainability commitments, and destination management plans. as well as those that form the civil defense framework. Second, I will explore how key stakeholders communicate and collaborate and to collect these representatives of tourism links. I will set management and safety to this level. For example, tourism industrial and management agencies. And finally, I'm looking at key stakeholders' attitudes and motivations for more formal private-public partnerships. And for this, I will use case studies of rural nature-based locations, specifically in Crystal, in the South Island. I'm combining the from 3 methods as and how you get a deal for sound, presenting the relationship in terms of policy, collaboration, and communication. So the 3 different levels. And this is how I'm picturing the research, being aware that, of course, it may change over time, especially because of COVID. In terms of the definition of the problem, conduct a review of the literature and had formal discussions with some of the future participants. And this allowed me to more context. And then the data collection methods have in here. So in terms of equality and plans, it's how you better understand the issue because it helps understand the formal decision-making processes within the 2 sectors and also allow to identify a range of stakeholders, the roles and the formal connections. So it's a very strong starting point for the next step. It involves a network graph and surveys. And networks have been defined as complex set of relationships in a social system, and specifically because it helps capture of the and how information and other resources are shared and how special interest groups form and function. And then the draft network will be validated through a participatory network analysis workshop where the participants will be invited to evaluate the network, adding links, focus at the studies focus instead on the Otago Southland region and specifically on Queenstown and Milford Sound, as I was saying before. And for the interviews, participants will be asked questions, activations for more partnerships, what are their expectations about roles, and as well the barriers to the enablers, integration between tourism and New Zealand. And then the results will be triangulated, and possible outcomes will include a framework that explains the relationships between tourism and emergency organizations, as well as recommendations and strategies to integrate the data. And in terms of the contributions, results will show how the point of collaboration with tourism management and how this changes levels of governance of destinations, for example, Europe destination will add on tourism disaster. For more practical, the findings will help promote and integration stakeholders involved in tourism in the resilience and response capability to them. So this is the project. Thank you very much for listening.
Awesome. Thank you for your presentation and sharing your work so far. Definitely a fascinating area, and I love network analysis personally as a little bit of an approach as well. What inspired you to use network analysis?
Was looking at the different methods, and I read a very recent article that mentioned that, and I was like, okay, this sounds interesting. And then I was looking into it, and I was like, okay, this is really a very good method if I could do research. And yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I personally think it could be a really powerful tool for understanding how change happens and how information can flow between several parties too. So can see its real benefit in tourism and disaster management. Carla has a question here. She's asking if you could explain more. Who are the key participants in your surveys and interviews?
Yeah. So it's so my study is looking at organizations, so not individuals, but of course to have data on organizations, I need to talk to individuals. My stakeholders are key informants, so representatives of the organizations that deal with tourist safety management at destination level. So that means all organizations at different levels. Here in New Zealand, it would be at council level, but then at a more local level, but also a more national level. And example are industry Aotearoa, tourism industry Aotearoa, and NEMA, who deals with emergency here in New Zealand. So national organizations, but also councils. I don't know if that answered the question.
Excellent. Are you looking at any particular people within each organisation?
Sorry, can you repeat that? Just
no,
the
that's
internet.
fine. Are you looking at any specific person within the organisations that can provide you the information?
Yeah. So usually I have more information about ZDR higher level. So team leaders, managers, for example, for emergency would be emergency leaders and team leaders. So those who can provide more detailed accounts of the collaboration.
Yeah, excellent. And do you have any theories or hypotheses so far on what that collaboration might look like?
Well, it's very actually. It's very different in the different regions, in the different destinations. There are destinations where the collaboration has a more formal approach, while for others, very much more informal. So have documents detailing how tourists should be managed and bringing together emergency organizations and tourism organizations, while others, they have like groups who train together. There are people from the tourism sector and they train together, and they talk about, okay, what do we have to do in case of, I don't know, flood and other hazards. So yeah, it's really variable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be quite interesting to see. Would one of the main outcomes be providing a nationally based framework that's tailorable for each area?
Yes, that's exactly the outcome, the expected outcome. So a framework that integrates, like on an organizational level, on a structural level, the two sectors. So an organizational chart, basically, where the positions are integrated, and that could be applied for different cases.
Yeah, it sounds quite interesting, and I can definitely see the value for tourism in general, not just through New Zealand as well, in some of those regions. Excellent. Are there any other questions from within the audience? Doesn't seem like it yet. Well, thank you so much for your presentation. It was, definitely a really fascinating study, and hopefully at our collaborative conference next year, we might have some preliminary results from you.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of this conference. Thank you.
Yeah, you too.
Awesome.
Bye.
I have a very awkward segue now into introducing myself as the next presenter for this research. So I could ask myself some questions like I have asked everybody else. So just in general, I'm my third year at Swinburne University in the Sport Innovation Research Group. They provide this amazing collaborative environment where we sort of motivate and help each other as a group of PhD students, and of course tied in with our senior academics as well. So very lucky and very thankful to be involved with this particular group on my PhD journey. And as I starkly realized this week is coming closer and closer to an end, which has just flown by incredibly quickly to be as far through as I am so far. So I'll give it a couple of minutes just to get back on track, but throwing out to the audience, how are we feeling so far today? Are we enjoying the presentations so far? Excellent. Great response rate. Awesome. Thanks, Paul and Carlos. Yeah, really happy that we can come together online in this sort of collaborative environment. And it is exciting, and totally agree with Emma, especially our first year students that are coming and presenting for the first time. And I mean, I'm especially impressed with Lyndon in her first month. And there is an amazing spread of research happening across several countries, especially in the sport and in the tourism spaces as well. So learning a lot today, and very excited to be a part of such a special event. And thank you to the more senior academics who are joining us in this space today as well. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your, no doubt, absolutely hectic schedules to be a part of our growth as PhD students and future academics. Oh, well, thank you, Paul. What motivated me to do a PhD in my field? Senior, not so old, Emma Sherry was one of my definite inspirations. So I worked with her as a research assistant after my honours, working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander programs and community COLD programs, particularly within the community and sport, in evaluating the social impact that they had. And I just remember turning around to her at the end of this project and saying, Emma, I've fallen in love with this work. I'm going off into industry again for a bit, but I think this could be an amazing PhD. And I think it was about 9 months later, Emma and I reached out to each other, and it happened to be that was the right time for this particular PhD. And yeah, we went from there, and it's been 2.5 years of a successful marriage, I'm going to call it, between Emma, Adam Garg, and Andrew Peters. I remember after my interview for it, I got a call straight away from Emma, and she's like, Charles, we're getting married. I'm like, okay, we are on. Anyway, that is a long-winded way and a digression from your question, but that was my main motivation. And we can really take it back to who I was when I was a child. I migrated here from New Zealand and found sport was one of the only things that made me feel part of Australian society when I did move here. So I saw the power that sport had at a community level in making someone feel included, and this someone was myself, but having that sense of belonging and the power that had outside of the school environment, which I did not enjoy my school environment whatsoever. So I knew from a very young age that I wanted to pursue a career in something that could help other people feel that sense of belonging. Oh my God, Loretta, we need to connect if Andrew Peters is one of your supervisors. I have so much respect for Andrew Peters and think he is one of the most amazing humans going around, which I will touch on why shortly. But yeah, that's what has inspired me to do my PhD in this particular space. And I will say a massive thank you and shout out to Paul as well. He's in the Sport Innovation Research Group with me and has been one of the people that has politely sat there and listened as I've reflected, ranted, and questioned my time and position with this particular research as well. So thank you for being that and helping me in that space. Okay, before I get too personal and soppy, I might start with my presentation. So thank you all for joining me here today. For those who don't know me, I'm Chelsea Taylor and I'm a third-year PhD student at Swinburne under the expert guidance of Professor Emissary, Associate Professor Adam Karg and Dr. Andrew Peters. These three supervisors have really helped me on my journey in wrestling this approach that is decolonizing my research and this decolonizing lens to make sure I am doing culturally safe research and making sure that, Indigenous voices are the forefront of my research. So it's been a really important part to have this space with my supervisors to have ongoing reflections and conversations about the research, about the way the world works and the role of ourselves and our histories within research, and in this particular case, approaches to measurement and evaluation. So before I move on into my presentation today, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land that both myself and Swinburne University are located at the moment. I'd also like to extend my acknowledgement to all First Nations peoples globally, both throughout Australia, New Zealand, and internationally in general. And I hope we can use this time to reflect on our own experiences and our own relationships with First Nation peoples and with our lands that we are on as well. And please take that throughout this presentation and include these reflections as we go. So I'm going to start off by just having a bit of a chat about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and how we've led to program development. So part of this process and part of decolonising or decolonisation extends to understanding the impacts that colonisation has had on our societies. So a lot of this stems down to, I guess, reflecting and realising that the way that we live here in Australia and the world that we're currently in is a result of colonisation. So the structures that we have been educated in and those institutions from primary school right through to our tertiary education are all rooted in colonised ways of doing things or westernised ways of doing things. And the result of colonisation and what happened hundreds of years ago when basically a takeover of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here in Australia occurred, it has led to erosion of culture and erosion of way of life that was true for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and the way that we approach life as Western people or the colonisers took over. And as a result, many years later, that has led to these disparities in health, these disparities in social outcomes between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and non-Indigenous peoples. And nowadays, as a result, governments and institutions alike have noticed this disparity and wanting to rectify it. Now, it's important to realise that the governments and the institutions are predominantly coming from colonised or institutionalised structures. So it's not necessarily Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples saying that they've got health or social disparities compared to non-Indigenous peoples. That's coming from a very westernised white perspective. And as a result, there has been funding and initiatives such as Closing the Gap that are aimed at improving these health and social disparities, which have often led to the introduction of community-focused programs. So these are programs that are in place to achieve one or many social or health outcomes with or for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So historically, because this has come from a very westernized perspective, the voice and self-determination of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples hasn't really been present in the design and therefore the evaluation of these programs. So when it comes to existing ways that we measure and evaluate sporting programs that are designed to achieve some of these health and social outcomes, have come from a very westernized perspective. So we have determined the outcomes that should be happening with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, as opposed to working with the community to understand the outcomes they want, or for them to self-determine and tell us what is going on for them, or what they want these programs to be achieving in that particular sense. So this is where part of the process of decolonizing comes into play. So decolonizing is essentially acknowledging the histories of the world, how the world is now, how it has been in our relationship with that. So essentially this is unlearning what we know about the way the world works and bringing through other voices, and in this case, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices, into the measurement and evaluation of these programs, as opposed to putting it onto those communities. And that's where this big distinction comes into play. So there has been many calls from different researchers, both within the sport for development space and the health promotion space, calling for more empowerment of Indigenous voices within these measurement and evaluation frameworks and within these fields. And this is something that I've taken and applied through Indigenous methodology, and in using a decolonizing lens into my research, which is fundamentally a measurement and evaluation of programs. So to begin this decolonizing of a measurement and evaluation, there are several parts of processes that we can go through. And this is something I've wrestled with this entire time, which is why I spent time at the start of this acknowledging the people that have helped me reflect and learn throughout this. But first and foremost is understanding your position with histories, position with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, position with the research, and unlearning what you've known so far. So a big part of this for me was realizing that the education that I've had up until this particular point of my life had been very westernized and institutionalized, coming from one point of view. So there were very little Indigenous knowledges built into my education system and what I understood about the way the world works. And reflecting on this position and reflecting on my own histories was one of the first steps of decolonizing within the self. This led to decolonizing of my knowledge and thoughts. So throughout my life now, or over the last 2 years, this process started to happen where I would understand it, or try to understand and unpack what I know. So that could be about the sport for development space, and understanding that even the need for these sport for development programs within the Australian context had come about because of colonization and because of the ways that we see as colonized people of the way the world works. We can extend this through decolonizing methodology and the sense that the need to do research in general has come from a really colonized, institutionalized perspective, as opposed to the other way around, where we might have Indigenous knowledges incorporated in this. And part of this decolonizing isn't tearing apart what we know is the way the world works at the moment, but understanding how we can incorporate multiple perspectives, multiple truths, and multiple ways of doing and being, particularly using Indigenous knowledges and the rich histories that come about from that. And part of that is also realizing the even modern day impacts that colonization has had on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as well. So extending into concepts around intergenerational traumas and how even speaking about some of these issues may bring up that within people depending on their bloodlines and their own histories. So within this research and within decolonizing my measurement and evaluation here has constant questioning. And I will say, I think every day I do this work, I sit there and question who I am as a non-Indigenous Australian New Zealander hybrid, why I am the person that should be doing this work, because it should be coming from the voice of the community. So originally I really struggled with this concept, and I look to myself now, and while I still have my struggles with this concept, and this kind of came from a reflection I had with Paul, it's understanding that me questioning these things is what is going to ensure that I am decolonizing, or in the process of it, and ensuring that my work does have the voice of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples at the forefront of it. So now when I do my interviewing, and I'm in my second phase of interviewing in my third year, so I have a sample of 108 individuals so far that I have spoken to over the last 2.5 years within 2 phases of research. My reflection process has evolved over time, but at the current present point, I'm asking myself, what is something new that I've found from this interview? How has this changed my perspective? And is there a concept I need to unpack further for the next interview? So if I have a question about something, or I'm not 100% sure, instead of trying to redefine that concept myself, I will then bring my curiosity or my questioning and use the findings from the previous answers in the next interview. So then more people from different walks of life can start answering these questions, so I can provide a more holistic answer from the community. And in some cases and with some questions, it's understanding that there is no answer, and that this may be different for every individual that there is. And this came around from the culture and identity piece that I've wrestled with, that is self-determined by each individual. So one of the biggest parts of understanding your position and reflecting on the processes around measurement and evaluations has been reflections and constantly reflecting on this process. Now, some of my reflections have been written, some of my reflections has been through calls with friends, and mostly my reflections have come from open and honest conversations with members of the community, and in particular, Dr. Andrew Peters, who has helped expand my mind and way of thinking in a really invaluable sense. But my learnings have come in many different stages, and this is a constant iterative process of unlearning and relearning. And I have 3 reflections on the screen here at the moment that have come from my written reflections, but have been built into each stage. So my first set of reflections there are from my fieldwork in year 1, where I went out to a remote community in the middle of Australia, and I saw what remote life was actually like, and for the first time had a true appreciation of what it was like to act out Indigenous culture or Aboriginal culture for this particular community group. I also had travelled up with a group of more metro and regional Aboriginal girls, and seeing their reflections and their immediate responses, and having some yarning circles around some fire, what all of that meant and how it informed their perspective as well. And I think one of my biggest learnings from that was not only the importance of connection with land and connection with other people, but how diverse Aboriginal and Torres Strait culture actually is, and how we can't pocket that into a one-size-fits-all approach. I move on to year 2, and COVID happens, and I'm just doing my literature searching and review from home. And Andrew, my supervisor, suggested that with everything I read, I should be writing a reflection about how this is influencing me and how it's influencing my project. So if you can't go to a community and experience culture, one thing you can do is engage with literature and engage with something that's online, and appropriate sources of reading, and start to decolonize within yourself and decolonize your knowledge by going into the literature or reading some information, even if it's something could be like Dark Emu, for example, a book by Bruce Pascoe. But these are the sorts of things that you can start doing and then reflect immediately on how this has perhaps shaped your thinking. And then the third reflection I have is a more recent one from within the last month, where I started to understand more of my past behaviours. And this particular one had to do with cultural burnout and the strain that consistently going to the same people within Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities can put this added strain and load on them, this cultural load that's additional to a normal working load or life load. So reflecting on my behaviours and actions there and expanding my thinking to other ways where I could get this information and these learnings. So in summary, and what I hope you can take away from this presentation and perhaps implement in your own decolonizing process, and when you approach measurement and evaluation within sport programs, there are 4 big key learnings. And the first one is around building trust and reciprocity. And that reciprocity specifically is more about being willing to give back without expecting anything else in return. So if you're going to have a conversation with somebody about their culture, for example, and take a lot of care when you do that, be willing to do something for them, whatever they would like, within return of that conversation. Understand and unpack your own histories and who you have become to this particular point. And if any Indigenous knowledges have informed that, and how your histories impact who you are, and understanding how other people's histories, and when I say histories, I'm talking way back in your family bloodline. Self-determination, this concept is super important and is basically allowing members of the community to determine what is right for them, to determine what they need from a program, to determine the outcomes that they see are relevant, as opposed to me imposing those learnings onto them or those outcomes onto them. And of course, consistently reflecting and adjusting your approach based on what you've reflected on, and engaging those conversations. And you can speak to many people about this. It doesn't have to necessarily be just people from within the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community when it comes to reflecting on your work. And any questions? I can see a couple from there. Thank you. I think I went well over time. I get very ranty when it comes to this topic area. Yes, there are definitely challenges to decolonizing methodology, and those will be very individualized and personal depending on who you are. So I can't really answer that question directly, but that's what I'd find. And there are definitely differences between my first reflections and my latter ones. I think my grounding, understanding, and even confidence in this area has changed so much over the years. And I had so much fear and anxiety in my first lot of reflections, and it was very overwhelming for me to go straight into my field work. So in terms of that, I think I can see a big difference in my reflections. My first ones were kind of messy and all over the place, and well, I guess my latter ones are still messy and all over the place, but can reflect a little bit more on how this actually applies to research, and I can actually see the importance of how this process can work and what it's doing. So I'd say it's kind of like anything. When you do the work, you can see the growth. Paul says, how hard is it to do this work of decolonizing your thinking, research and evaluation work, but doing that within a colonized framework? And Paul, you kind of said it really beautifully there, and that is something that I've constantly been toying with and challenged by this entire time. Is we're in these institutions where we're expected to have academic outcomes. I work with an industry partner who wants industry outcomes, and everyone seems to have this preconceived idea and framework of what things should be, and that has caused a lot of tension and difficulty for me in how I think and how I approach my work there. Mark, my process of reflexivity is constantly evolving. I like to talk things out, so often I need a phone call or need a chat or a yarn with someone first. Sometimes I do my reflections immediately within the interview, and we'll have a reflective conversation with somebody in the interview. So I think it depends on the concept and the topic that comes up for me at that particular point of time and the relationship I have with that. And in terms of integrating my reflections into my research, again, sometimes it forms into my interviews, and I'll incorporate my reflections into my interviews. I will be possibly coding them alongside my interviews as well, and embodying them throughout that, because it has had an influence on there. And Tim, does my brain hurt? I think everyone that is doing a PhD, their brain probably hurts, sometimes more than others. So I hope I've answered everybody's questions there. Please feel free to reach out if you do have any more questions there. I've got one more from Graham. Do you reflect in your interviewing the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are also women, people with a disability? I haven't specifically sought out people who also identify as women, or potentially people who may have a disability, but it's not something that's not included either. So I'm just speaking broadly with people involved in these programs, and there is some gender focus within some of these programs. There has been some discussion about people with a disability as well. I think I've maybe answered your question there, but it's not first and foremost, and is somewhat out of the scope of my particular research at the moment. So yeah, I can't say it's a direct thing in it. There is some byproduct there to some extent, but not fully. Cool. I will cut myself off there. Thank you everybody for listening to my presentation today. We have one more presentation in our session, and that is John Smith from Griffith University. So I'm very excited to hear his presentation, which is Cruising with COVID, Destination Marketing in Crisis Times. I think a very relevant topic area. Hello, how are you today?
Hi, Chelsea. Thank you so much for having me here. I know I came in at almost the very last minute, so I'm very grateful to you for accommodating me and my presentation. And I've just been really thrilled by hearing all the presentations that came before me, and hope that I can in some way help to conclude this marvelous session that we've been having. So good to meet you.
Excellent, and lovely to meet you as well. Very much looking forward to your presentation to round out our mid-year HDR student presentations. So feel free to share your screen when you can, and we can get them.
Alrighty.
Perfect. How is it up in Queensland at the moment?
Queensland is doing well, not half as bad as Sydney or New South Wales, by extension. We're doing well. We no longer are required to wear masks, so that is fun.
That is a great development.
Yes, so I'm very happy for that. And I just hope that everything gets under control pretty soon, because it's going to it seems like it's ballooning. The cases are ballooning every day. And so I just hope everything goes back to normal, especially before Christmas, because I'm a big Christmas person.
Yes, absolutely. Fingers crossed for everybody.
Yes. Okay, so I have clicked my share screen. Are you seeing me, or is it that I need to replace this with the PowerPoint now?
It's time for the PowerPoint. So if you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
All righty. Much better?
See.
Would you like me to F5 full screen? Yeah.
Yeah, I still haven't got the slides come through yet on my end.
Okay. Maybe F5 will actually help. Alrighty, let's see. Yeah, is that better now? It's full screen mode.
No, I still don't have any slides. Does anyone else? Sometimes it's my end. So can anyone else? No. Cool. Thank you.
No one else can see?
Not yet.
Okay, what do I do here?
Sometimes leaving and coming back is a good option. That's normally what I do when my tech's not working on Hopin.
Okay. Alrighty, let's see if I can do that. And then I will pop back in 2 seconds.
We will see you shortly.
Great.
Cool. How is everyone else feeling out there? It's almost time for lunch and networking. We've done so well to get through so far. And we're back.
Yeah, so you're seeing me. Are you seeing me? And it is the computer icon with the line going through it, yes?
Yeah, that's the one.
Alrighty, so let me click on that now. And let's click share. Okay. It's better now?
Not yet. Oh, yes, we're on here. Perfect. We can see your slides. Yeah.
Okay, good. Do I need to full screen or is this okay?
You can, if you go into presenter mode, it should take everything over and then that'll be fine.
Okay. All right. Better?
Perfect. Good.
Right.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Chelsea. Good afternoon, everyone. As I mentioned before, it's an absolute privilege and pleasure to share my research with you. Just to give you a little bit of a background to me, my name is Janelle Smith. I hail from the island of sweet reggae beats and wonderful jerk chicken and many famous countrymen in sports. I'm sure the sports fans will appreciate. I'm from the country that is also the birthplace of Usain Bolt and Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce and all the other wonderful athletes who did a fantastic job representing Jamaica in the Olympics. I'm also from the land of the legendary Bob Marley, and I have come a very far way from home to study my PhD here on the other side of the world, because back home, I'm a tourism professional. I have worked in the field of tourism for over 15 years. I have worked with all the Caribbean islands, especially Jamaica, because it is my home country, working with the Jamaica Tourist Board, the Caribbean Tourism Organization. And I thought it quite prudent for me to come to the other side of the world to study another geographical location for small island developing states, which is Pacific Islands. So my hope and my aim as a career objective is to be able to do substantial research in small island developing states. It's with an emphasis, a focus on tourism research, because that is so needed for small island developing states. Now, my journey has been quite an interesting one. I was pleased to see a few presenters earlier from the University of Otago, because that is actually where I started my PhD journey in 2019. However, also in that year, as soon as I arrived in New Zealand, I got a letter from Griffith University offering me a full scholarship to come and study with them. So I could not refuse that offer. And so I did a transfer last year when the borders reopened to come to Griffith, specifically the Gold Coast campus, to study, to continue my PhD studies here. And it has been absolutely fantastic. The beaches are beautiful and they remind me a lot of home. Now, without further ado, I would love to get into my presentation. I am being led by the expertise of Professor Charles Arcodia from Griffith University. He's also the acting head of department for tourism, sports, and hotel management. And I'm also under the direction of Associate Professor Peter Woods, who is the Director International for Griffith University. I would also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Now, to get into my topic, yes, it's very relevant. And it was actually at the start of the pandemic that I decided to make my my research area a little bit more relevant. I started initially by focusing on the cruise industry, and I wanted to focus specifically on solo female travelers, because as a solo female traveler, I'm very passionate about research in this area. But along came this pesky little virus that has been just irritating us and giving us no ends of trouble. And tourism industry and the cruise industry, they're no exceptions. And so today I'll be speaking about destination marketing in crisis and dealing with the resurgence of the cruise industry amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, we all know how tourism is important to us. In fact, Manila Declaration by the World Tourism Organization, the WTO, in 1980 recognized the importance of this activity as an activity that is essential to the life of nations because of its direct effects on social, cultural, educational, and economic sectors of national societies and on their international relations. Tourism, we know, bringing large amounts of income to local economies right around the world. In fact, it generates opportunities, economic opportunities, and employment opportunities in various countries and regions of the world. And it is considered a sunrise industry as it accounts for over 10% of global GDP and 6.8% of total global exports of goods and services, and 4.3% of total investment. And these were statistics from the WTTC in 2019. Now, the cruise industry acts as a subset of the tourism industry. And to examine the operations of the cruise industry is quite unique in that Ahmed et al. 2002 said the cruise industry is distinct from other forms of travel and tourism in that cruise can be marketed as both a form of transportation to destinations and as a destination in and of itself. In other words, the cruise product differs from other types of land-based tourism products by rolling two core elements together into one: accommodation and, of course, resort entertainment. Now, the cruise ship itself is filled with facilities and services that continue to exceed the expectations of travelers. Today's ships offer a world of innovations that build cruise lines brands, from skydiving simulators, roller coasters, biking above the ocean, robotic bartenders, to celebrity chef kitchens, butler service, and all suite staterooms and facilities. And all generations, whether they're traveling together or solo passengers, can enjoy these features. Yielding such impressive results from these innovations, the cruising industry is the fastest growing category in the leisure travel market, and the demand for cruising actually grew 20.5% over the last 5 years. And the forecast was positive. In fact, in 2019, the world cruise industry generated over 150 billion in direct and indirect revenues, and nothing but growth was predicted from then. Now, with all these statistics, you would believe that it would be an absolute smooth sailing for the cruise industry, but not quite so. On February 1st in 2020, the cruise ship, the British registered cruise ship Diamond Princess, was the first cruise ship to have a major outbreak on board. Over 1,000 crew members on the liner, which docked actually in Japan, had persons becoming infected with COVID-19. 700 people were infected and 12 persons, unfortunately, died. This was the largest COVID outbreak site outside of China. Furthermore, and bringing it closer to home, Ito et al. Added that in Australia, the cruise ship Ruby Princess became the largest COVID-19 epicenter when the Ruby Princess arrived at the port of Sydney on March 19th. 2,700 passengers disembarked on arrival. The next day, 4 people tested positive, and by March 27, the number grew to 162. By the end of March 2020, at least 25 cruise ships had confirmed cases of COVID-19 infections, and by May, over 40 cruise ships had confirmed positive cases. To date, at least 69 cruise passengers have again, unfortunately, died from COVID-19, and this has been because they were passengers or crew members aboard cruise ships. Now, this definitely casted quite a shadow on the cruise industry. In fact, Gosling, Scott, and Hall affirmed that no other tourism subsector has been in the global news as often as cruises. Cruise goers have fallen sick en masse in the past, their predicament on the high seas coming into sharp focus. Warnings from advisors and world leaders around the world, such as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, actually remarked that the nature and design of cruise ships, where passengers are contained and virus can spread faster, makes them a particularly risky environment for vulnerable people. We have already seen the impact of coronavirus outbreak can have aboard cruise ships, and we have changed our advice about them. He warned that passengers or persons over 70 should try to avoid cruise ships at all costs. It is no surprise either that the legendary Donald Trump also had something to say. He said he'd rather crew members and passengers stay aboard cruise ships, and even so, CNN likened cruise ships to a floating petri dish. Variety also mentioned that cruise ships are often settings for outbreaks of infectious diseases because of their closed environment, contact between travelers from many countries, and crew transfers between ships. Now, who could forget the feature that they had on 60 Minutes for cruise passengers or former cruise passengers who were quarantined on cruise vessels for over a month. In fact, this passenger remarked that he thought he would be left to die on a ship. And the iconic image of the global COVID-19 pandemic and its abrupt shutdown on the hypermobile world have been those stranded aboard cruise ship full of desperate passengers wanting to disembark, and destination communities less than keen to receive them. The suspension of cruise operations had a pronounced detrimental effect on the global economy. And as cruising touches almost every sector from transportation to agriculture, the ripple effect was also eminent. And even with these current events and the negative press that has been associated with the cruise industry, CLIA, which is the International Organization for Cruise, remarked in 2020 that when the time is right for cruise ships to set sail once again, the community will be an important part of the global economic and societal recovery. It is also estimated that the tourism industry has been the hardest hit by the pandemic, and it's forecasted that the tourism sector has taken a 20 to 30% dip in international arrivals. Now, against this background, the purpose of this research is to analyze the destination marketing strategies used in the resurgence of the cruise industry amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. This aim is further broken down into research objectives, the first of which will focus on the implementation of health and safety protocols by cruise operators to manage the risk of COVID-19 aboard cruises. The second RO will be the impact of the COVID-19 regulatory framework on the cruise product design and service delivery. And the last objective will focus on an evaluation, which is to gauge the responses of the cruise experience by passengers, to also deduce service satisfaction, which was what we call largely the cruise experience scape. Integrating theory and with practice, the conceptual framework or theoretical underpinning that will be employed in this study is Morrison 2017, his price model for destination marketing. He posits that the central elements of destination marketing include planning, research, implementation, control, and evaluation. He further says that without the last three elements of destination marketing, that of implementation, control, and evaluation, without these elements, it would be hard for the marketer to achieve the goal of any marketing campaign. To achieve these aims and objectives, the research will take a mixed methods, phased approach to data collection with the use of qualitative content analysis, interviews, and ethnography. So phase one will see the research conducting qualitative content analysis on cruise tourism marketing campaigns, websites, and press kits. Secondly, interviews will be conducted with cruise tourism management professionals and crew members in Caribbean and Oceania. It's important for me to do a comparison, being from the Caribbean and also living here in Oceania. And both regions, both locations also have a bevy of small island developing states who are extremely dependent on tourism and in particular cruise activity for the sustenance of their economies. Phase three will see an analysis via ethnography, which is to review cruise blog sites. And the blog site that has been selected is TripAdvisor. In order to analyze the data, I will be using thematic analysis to organize the information via themes. Now, why is this necessary? This research will definitely be fulfilling a gap in the literature. As Walters in 2011 says, that there still needs to be a greater facilitation of discourse in terms of the types of messages destination marketing organizations are best to employ when a disaster has hit, and consequently, marketers tend to take an ad hoc approach to post-disaster communications that may not be effective in terms of encouraging visitation. Ritchie and Cassidy also cite that cruise or risk management research is desperately needed and says that despite the growing threat of natural and man-made disasters to tourism businesses and destinations, few tourism businesses are prepared to handle the impacts of such a threat. Fore and Hosey also cite that disaster planning and managing the threat of crisis are becoming necessary aptitudes and core competencies of destination managers. Avram rounds out by saying equally important is an understanding of how best to communicate with the tourism market in the wake of a disastrous event by destination marketing organizations. And notwithstanding the rise in research, this research interest into the cruise tourism industry, the study is quite original and significant because cruise tourism remains in its infancy, and there have been several calls for further research. There's also a dearth of literature on cruises as it relates to disaster communication, response, and recovery. Furthermore, minimal research exists on the topic of destination marketing and managing in the risk of a pandemic in cruise tourism experience. So this research will seek to extend our understanding of tourism system preparedness, response to and recovery of crises and disasters, and using macro level or case studies or micro level approaches to business recovery, planning, and marketing. In addition to theory, this research also hopes to make the following practical contributions. It is going to be discussing quite a topical research, as we know, which is a COVID-19 phenomenon, which is at peak cognizance at the time and probably will be for the next few years. I aim also to provide solutions and best practices to improve the resilience and the recovery of such a vital sector, the cruise sector. Thorough research will also be done here, and it has the opportunity to change lives through personnel training, assisting in generating income for the tourism industry, and helping to rebuild economies and truly making a difference. It will further act as a tool of forecasting demand and increasing consumer confidence by unearthing new knowledge about the needs of the modern day traveler, which I believe is always interesting. Now, what is the way forward? International tourism, as we know, is highly vulnerable to disruption by natural hazards. Risks can emerge slowly, such as those associated with climate change, or rapidly with little warning, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is coming from Coffee 2020. And the contribution of tourism to developing economies and countries is now so great that any downturn in this level of activity is a grave cause for concern. Our interconnected world also means that responding to these crises and disasters will require transformation in all components of tourism systems globally to ensure a more resilient future. So I'm very keen to see what the experience is going to be like as we set sail into a promising future. Any questions? Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was really great and very interesting to think forward about what our whole tourism, but especially cruises, seeing the way they were hit, how that's going to look moving forward.
Yes, thank you so much, Chelsea. I appreciate your feedback. Are there any more questions? I would appreciate everyone's feedback on the topic and the approach.
How do you manage a topic area where the future is still so unknown in terms of when we're going to be available to travel and what have you again?
That has been a significant challenge. Because in fact, one of my my proposed data collection was to actually go aboard a cruise ship. That was what was initially proposed a couple months ago, but now, we don't know in Australia when we will set sail again. In the Caribbean, however, in my area, they have actually started. So there've been about 15 cruises that left the port of Miami to come down into the Caribbean. They stopped in the Bahamas and also in Jamaica. And so they really are trying, but even then there've been outbreak on the cruises. There are 4 cases last week, and there are 6 cases the week before, even among passengers and crew who have been fully vaccinated. So it's exciting because it's unfolding right in front of our eyes, but it also poses challenges because it's unfolding right in front of our eyes. So, it's basically that's really what it is.
Yeah. How do you think about the idea cruise tourism is one of the reasons for unsustainable tourism?
Yes, actually, in my research proposal, which I've just about submitted, there's a section that I discussed that cruise industry has been seen as tourism's pariah. And because it is seen as one of the reasons or one of the causes for over-tourism, and the pollution to sea and life on land, life below water, all the sustainable development goals that it's not achieving. So there's a lot of people who deem that cruise is unsustainable. And we've seen here how susceptible it is to risk. But at the same time, I have also seen the benefits, being from a small island developing state, how much economies and people by extension suffer due to lack of this activity. So it's a big trade-off that we're seeing in society now, where it's, do you prioritize health and environmental sustainability, or do you prioritize the economy? Or is there any way that we can all exist in a happy medium? But there are trade-offs all around with not just cruise tourism, but every other tourism activity. There's trade-offs all around. But I totally agree with your comment, and there's a section that I've particularly made reference there. Due to the time frame today, I wasn't able to unpack the information about it being sustainable, but I do take that point.
What a challenging area with those trade-offs as well. I mean, if
Yes.
you know, building an economy of a local area versus sustainability and other huge issues that we have globally.
Exactly.
Great answer. And we have another question here from Paul. Do you think cruise tourism, will be able to overcome the bad PR from COVID and be as popular as pre-COVID?
Actually, that's a very, very important question, Paul. Thank you so much for that. And what we have seen is that even during the pandemic, when the most popular cruise lines such as Carnival and Norwegian, when they were offering sales promotions, large discounts, we saw that there was an overbooking. You know, people were not deterred in any way due to the negativity. And that's something that's really going to come out in my research. I was very pleased to see that even in the midst of the pandemic, when all of these cases were emerging, and I was following all the blog sites on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and also TripAdvisor. And those avid cruisers, we call them, people who have been on cruises before, like myself, and who are very passionate about the experience, they said they're ready to go again. They just can't wait to actually board a cruise. So we haven't seen much of a deterrent from passengers. I think the greatest deterrent would be with those non-cruisers, as we call them, those who are not used to cruising and it will be their first experience. They may be a little bit more cautious, but for those avid cruisers and repeat cruisers, they're just ready to go. They're ready to go.
It's going to be really fascinating research, and especially around how you manage that or how you approach marketing when you've got two very, very different consumer segments there. Awesome.
Certainly.
Well, if there's no more questions, we will call that a day. Thank you so much for finishing our mid-year HDR presentation set.
Thank you for having me.
To have you on board. Thank you very much. And up next, we have our networking session. So on the left-hand side there, you'll see the networking with a handshake. This is totally optional because I get it's lunchtime and I'm hungry too. So feel free to join in that. Otherwise, at 1:30, we will have our approaching PhD and how we manage that experiences from our past students coming up back in the session rooms at 1:30. So have a great break networking session, hopefully meet some few people, and we'll see you back here shortly. Take care.